Hello and welcome to Academic Crisis Line. Today I'm live again, and today we're going to talk about side hustles. Because I had a very vivid discussion with one of my colleagues this week about what counts as a side hustle and what does not, just upfront, I'm not actually going to talk much about how to make money next to your job. I'm actually talking more about academic side hustles, and I think these are all things which you're doing more or less voluntarily or maybe paid next to your academic job, but they are still part of the academic everyday business. So I'm not actually going to talk about how to materialize your skills outside in the industry sector and like freelance on the side, but I'm going to talk more about which academic side hustles can be useful for your career and at which career stage I would recommend you doing them and when not. As usual, if you have questions coming, please ask them right away and don't wait. There's a slight delay in the live stream, so I'm going to wait very awkwardly for your questions. So in order to make sure that I actually answer this in time when it fits to the topic, just ask them right away. And you can ask the questions either by using the YouTube live chat function here on, I think it's mirrored, so it's actually, no, it's on this side. The YouTube live chat function, or you can tweet me to the Academic Crisis Line account on Twitter, which is @ph_dial with a capital P and D. So, in preparation for today's session, I made a small Facebook poll to see who of my academic friends is doing side hustles and what kind of side hustles they're doing. And it turns out almost 80% of people who have an academic position do some kind of side hustle, and most of them do up to 5 on a regular basis. And well, some of them do more, some of them do less. But it's also, many of them are temporarily. So there are a few things you continue doing for years, whereas other things are things you do for a year and then you turn it over to somebody else. So, and many side hustles are also not necessarily something where you decide whether you do it at all or not. So one of the most popular side hustles, or one thing which almost everybody does, is reviewing for journals or conferences. This is just academic service, which is part of the day-to-day business. And if you're lucky, you can do this in a paid way, and you can actually get compensated by journals. Most of us do this for free. And I think reviewing is really important for everybody. So review articles for journals. You will need reviewers reviewing your articles. So for every article you publish and you get free reviewers, you should review free articles. In your early career, you're not going to be asked a lot about reviewing. This will come up more often. If you want to get more experience with it, you can ask your supervisor whether you can help him or her review 1 or 2 articles. And then you basically just do this together so that you can learn how to do it. Besides this, I think it's really great to volunteer, especially in the beginning of your career, for abstract reviewing for conferences. Reviewing is great because it gives you a lot of practice and it will help you improve your own writing. When you see other people's mistakes, you will immediately see what is important in a paper, how do you get an argument across, what is really annoying, like in formatting things or in figures where you can't actually find the information you need. So just by looking at other people's mistakes, you will take a lot out for your own writing, and I think this is great. So besides this, reviewing articles or reviewing abstracts is also a good networking tool because it gets you in touch with editors or conference organizers. And by this, people already know your name and you might be able to talk to 1 or 2 big people in the next conference just because you have already been in touch with each other via email, just through the reviewing business. So yeah. I think this is something you should do, and you should start early. Another thing is editing. Editing is something which is probably more relevant once you have a bit more experience and have gained your PhD already. And there are 3 ways you can do this. First, of course, you can be on the editorial board of a journal. which is great, but this is something you can only do once you're actually already established in the field. So I'm not going to talk about this much because I'm not established in my field yet, and I can't tell you much about it. Another way you can do editing practice is by editing a special issue on a certain topic. And I think this is a tremendous opportunity. Like once you are a little bit experienced and you have maybe 1 or 2 paper out yourself, editing a special issue is amazing because you can basically pick and invite all the people you find interesting or would potentially work with or are important for your later career. And you can invite them for contributing to a special issue and you get in touch with them. So it's a great networking opportunity. And I would love doing this, and I'm planning to do this in the next few years. So this is something you can do with your supervisor or another person, probably not on your own unless you're a bit higher up the ladder. But yeah, I think this is fantastic. It's probably very time consuming and probably also very annoying to run after many, many people to make sure they all hold their deadlines and they actually make everything in time. And once they submitted everything in time, you have the same hassle again with finding reviewers and running after reviewers to submit their review in time. I think still, at the end, this is a great networking experience and it's great for your career. A third way to do editing services is actually via a paid side job. I know a lot of people who are, for example, native English speakers and just offer their services in proofreading and editing articles for other labs and get paid for it. I've never done this myself and don't really have very specific information, but this is a thing. And if you know how to write an article and your writing abilities in English, for example, are good, this is something you can consider as an actual paid side hustle. And it's probably a good thing to do, especially if you're an underpaid PhD researcher. Another very popular side hustle is doing side research projects. These can happen by advising students, by actually doing a project yourself on the side, or by having external collaborations. I think side research projects are great. Let me check. I think side hustles are great for people who want to explore new research areas or maybe get a new perspective on their own research specialty and are interested in wider areas. It's also very important, a very good opportunity for people who consider actually swapping their field of research to get a foot in the door. And I think before you start a side project, you should have completed one project from start to article submission, at least. More is better, but I think in order to know what you're getting into, you should know what all the process steps are and what it means to be involved in a project. I think otherwise it's almost impossible to estimate how much time you actually have to invest in which time frame you're planning about. So, sorry. Yeah, I think the advantages is that it gives you the opportunity to explore new areas. It also would help you networking, especially with external collaborations. It opens an opportunity to try out new things. I really think doing side projects is fun, and I draw a lot of motivation for my main research projects from side projects. And I think it's also great to do these projects which are not committed to success. So you don't, like, if it doesn't work out, well, so be it. So you can use this in a more explorative way and have less pressure about it. And you can use it to generate new hypotheses or test whether a new approach would work out or not. And if it doesn't work out, well, you try something else, it's fine. So I think they are also great pilot projects for maybe writing a grant proposal eventually. The downsides is that they are sometimes tricky to coordinate, both in terms of time, but also if more than you are involved. So you always have to keep in mind that this is not your most priority project, even though sometimes you work a bit more on it and sometimes a bit less. Your main project should always go first. And this is sometimes a bit difficult. You certainly should coordinate this with or run this by your supervisor. And this is something doing side projects is something you either do completely in your free time on weekends, or it's something you should clarify whether it's okay to work on this during the week. Working especially with external collaborations and also within your lab, basically as soon as more people are involved, it also involves a little bit of guilt in case your projects don't work out as expected. And then you have to invest more time on your side projects and you can't keep the promised deadlines. This is something which is very likely to happen because side projects will never have the same priority. So a very important thing to consider as well is that they are likely to take more time than your main research projects, for the simple reason that you have to squeeze them in the time where you have time between your other projects. So yeah, besides this, especially when you do it externally, it's great for networking and like getting a foot in the door in another research specialty. And yeah, I think it's a good thing to do if you can afford it. Another thing is advising students. So advising students actually is a great opportunity to explore side projects without actually having the time commitment of running an entire research project by yourself. I think advising students is great for researchers who are at least midway through their PhD and have a little bit of experience. And you have to keep in mind that you still need some time resources to take care of the student. But it's also still great for people who have very strong time restrictions because of teaching obligations and can't actually keep up with doing the research they would like to do. By supervising students, you still have the opportunity to do research projects on the side while not getting too far back with your actual main job. So I think the biggest advantage of supervising students is that it's a lot of fun, and it's probably the most rewarding thing you can do in science. So I haven't published a Nature paper yet, so it might be that this is just as rewarding as having a great student. But so far, this is my favorite part of the job. It's a great learning experience. You will learn a lot about yourself and like also how people deal with things differently. And everybody's different. You will learn a lot about the other side of supervising, which will help you a lot in the long run with dealing with your own supervisor and finding better ways to communicate or organize things together. So I think from supervising students yourself, your biggest benefit, apart from having fun, is also that you actually are going to have an easier time coordinating with your own supervisors. So it will force you to learn some skills in management and supervision, and it will force you to also become a bit more organized with your own stuff and more realistic and specific about expectations from others. The downside is that it can be emotionally intense and challenging because you're responsible for a young person and a young professional, and young professionals also have problems and go through difficult phases. Also, they are not only good students, so some of them are actually more challenging and less motivated and maybe also less talented. And you also have to be able to deal with this. I think it's really, really important to get the attitude in that having a student is not cheap research labor. So having a student is not only some like science slave who's carrying out your project. It is really important to also always keep in mind that the student has to take something home from this and that the student has to benefit from this. So they have to be able to learn things which are going to be beneficial for them in the long run, or they get their own publication out of this. They can write their master or bachelor thesis with you. So these sorts of things are important to keep in mind. So yeah, I still think it's one of the best things you can do, but be aware that this is not something you alone should benefit from, but the student should benefit as much as you do. Another fun side hustle, which is a bit different, is organizing talks and regular meetings. I think this is great for postdocs, maybe not so much for PhD students or master students, but it's a great networking experience. It is very stressful to coordinate times with all these very busy, important people and make sure people are there and do the advertising in time. And because these things are regularly, these are also quite a time commitment. Even though it's not a lot of work, you have to keep in mind that that it's just these things come on a frequent basis. So you have to advertise in time and have to make this time. So when you're really busy and you have a very stressful phase, it's still imperative that you make the time to send out the emails accordingly and take care of everything. And that you maybe have to block a few days a month just to do this. And it's a longer term time commitment because you have to do this for a period of time. So while this is a great network experience, this is a lot of work. And I think in order to be taken seriously and have a bit more success with doing these things, because they are very challenging, I think you should not be too early in your career. Another thing, another side hustle is non-obligatory teaching. So I think volunteering for a teaching position or taking a guest lectureship is great for people who either love teaching, for people who would like to get teaching experience, for people who want to try out teaching to see whether this is something they want to do and they can do. And it's also a side hustle, which is usually paid. Keep in mind, it's usually not paid very well because many people need this for their CV and because universities don't have a lot of money. So if you really only want to do this for the money, you probably get paid better if you're waiting on your local pizzeria on Saturdays. So the plus side of teaching is it can be a lot of fun. And if you're planning to run for a faculty position eventually, it will look good for you on your CV that you're committed to teaching. And it will also open possibilities to go for a lectureship position, which might secure you a more permanent academic position earlier in your career, from where you can then still get research grants or whatever. So if you like teaching or you're planning on the long term to have a more teaching-based position in academia, doing teaching voluntarily next to your normal research or science job is a good thing to do. It is very important to keep in mind that teaching is probably the most time-intense and energy-draining side hustle you can possibly do as an academic. So this is something which you really need to run by your PI and which you can't just do on the weekends. This is really something where it's very difficult before you've done it at least once to estimate how much time this will actually eat up and how much energy. So beware, beware, but do it because it's fun. Another thing is committee and admin work. And I know a lot of people who really, really hate this, but I also have the feeling that a lot of people have the feeling they have to do this and it will look good on their CV. So I would like to give a warning about this. I've probably done a bit too much of committee and admin work. And while I learned a lot from this, this is probably something which also once in a while backfired when I was sending out my CV and applied for jobs. So doing a lot of these things on the side can also make you look like a troublemaker or somebody who's overly committed and doesn't really want to doesn't really spend all the time of research and has trouble prioritizing. So I think committee and admin work is great if you want to look behind the scenes and learn a bit more about politics of an institute and management of the university. So doing this will allow you to look behind the scenes and understand a bit more about how money is distributed, how money is gained, and what are actually all the difficulties with managing an institute. So if this is something you would be interested in on the long run, do one or two of these things once in your early career. I think if you're an idealist who wants to implement change, it's a really good thing to do these things as well, but don't be too optimistic about what you can achieve. So, and pick your battle. If you want to change things and you want to change policy, pick your battle and just do one thing and invest a bit more time in this than rather do too many. So this type of side hustle can be extremely frustrating, and you might also end up being a target for your colleagues who have to vent about certain things. So even though they're not mad at you, but people will be mad at institute policies or new rules, even though you can't change anything about this. But as soon as you are a staff representative, people will run into your office and complain about things and expect you to change this, even though this is not in your power. So this will also bring me to the last disadvantage of doing committee work. It can really spoil relationships with your colleagues and students. So this is something like if there are serious tensions at an institute and you do committee work and you can't actually be in the institute opposition, but you're trying to do a more diplomatic stance, you can also become a target of people not trusting you anymore because they think you're the right hand of this big person who is evil and implements bad change. So be ready that this is not only a positive thing, and be ready that you might not want to put this on your CV all the time, depending on where you're playing. Okay, I think this is all I have to say about this, and you can ask me questions about this later. Another thing many people do on the side is volunteer work and outreach. And there is a huge discrepancy between the Anglo-American culture and academia and the European culture. I think if you want to survive in European academic research, you have to do this. There is no way you can get around of doing some volunteer work and outreach to the public on the side of your research job, for the simple reason that it's mandatory for half of the grants you can apply to, and that it's really, really important for many, many funding opportunities. In the United States, I don't have a feeling anybody cares about this. So while it's fancy to give a TED Talk, this is probably the only thing you could worry about. And if you're planning to do in the Anglo-American academic job market, then you probably don't have to worry about this. So this is now going to my European friends. Outreach to the public and volunteer work is great as a temporary distraction, and doing something on the side which is not too much of a time-consuming commitment. So it's also nice that you give something back for the tax money you're paid from. And it's also just fun to engage with the public. And I really like this part of where you start rethinking your project and see what is actually relevant about this and what are the possible applications of it. Because you have to communicate it to non-scientists. And I think this is a great practice to think about your own projects and where you want to go with it. So I think it's a good opportunity to find new meaning in your work and basically rethink your priorities and why your work is important. So I think this can be a really rewarding experience. So I already thought about everything. So one way to do public outreach is blogging, which is probably one of the things many researchers do. And I think blogging is great fun if you enjoy writing, if you want to practice writing and look for a more casual outlet for your ideas and thoughts and opinions. So I think blogging, or even if you don't publish it, but you just write a blog for yourself, is really good to reorder your thoughts and bring this to its actual most core meeting and get rid of jargon and all the highbrow academic word and formulations which make it difficult. So I think blogging is great if you like writing, if you want to communicate about your research. And I think it's also great to overcome writer's blockage just because you have a very different way to approach your writing. So yeah, blogging can help writing. It can also increase your visibility if your blog is widely followed. It can invite a lot of discussion with your colleagues around the world, and increases your visibility in the field. And it also can be fun and help communicating what you're doing. It feels a bit like a commitment, though, because you are trying to do this regularly, and having a blog only makes sense if you do this on a regular, periodic basis. So it is sort of a commitment, and you can think about it, but always keep in mind these are all things you're doing voluntarily on the side, and you can stop at any time if you don't feel like it anymore, or if you have the feeling it's not really worth it. Having a blog can also help you find a job. I actually know people who had their blog on science and fun and data visualization and data analysis, which actually helped them get a job out of industry, out of academia and industry, where in the private sector they could basically, via their blog, communicate that they have very widely applicable skills and that they can actually do very interesting things for them. So if you consider a job outside academia, this is also where you can communicate your skill without your very dry academic CV. One thing which I don't have any experience with yet, because my blog has not generated negative feedback yet, but I assume that if you write a blog and you're very visible in public, that you can't anticipate that all feedback will be positive about this. A lot of people will just hold back with their opinions if they are not positive, but you might also be object to shitstorm and people bullying you online. So it hasn't happened to me yet. I can't really say much about it, but I assume that this can happen. Now we're coming to the things which are probably in a more narrow sense considered side hustles. And these are consultancy work, freelancing work, data analysis and visualization work, and editorial work you're doing on the side. These are things which are great because they are paid. And also, besides generating a side income, they are also very helpful in case you consider taking a step out of academia and find a job in the private sector. I strongly recommend only people who already have the skills needed for this job or who are actively working on developing these skills for themselves to do this, because having a side job is very, very time consuming. Also, even if it's only freelancing, but also most working contracts don't technically allow for this. So you really have to consider whether you run this by your boss or not. So if you're planning to be a full-time academic and you just do these things once a while on a weekend, this is probably something you should just talk with your PI about and see whether they are okay with it or not, and come up with a plan and discuss how this can not affect your productivity during the week or like on your main job. If you are planning to use this to step outside of academia and search for a new job, then maybe you don't want to talk about this with your boss. This probably depends a lot on your relationship with each other. But then you have a more sensitive time frame in which you can do this secretly on the side before you're actually making a serious move outside. So I don't think this is something, if you're very early in your career and you consider and you're serious about staying in academia, this is something you probably should not do unless you're one of these wonder women or wonder men who are actually able to work like 80 hours a week very productively. So I have no idea how I would be able to do this thing on the side, but if you can do this, do it, but I would be careful. And also make sure that you do not violate your working contract, because this could lead to direct termination of your contract. So most of the time, having an additional work engagement requires approval of at least your PI. So keep this in mind. The last part of this is online tutorials and lectures, as well as research methods and tool development. So online lectures and workshops or tutorials, like for example my blog, are also something many academics do. I think it's a great opportunity for people who like teaching but don't really do a lot of teaching in their everyday job. And it's great to gain experience. So I did not only do this because I wanted to do something fun, but I also think this is going to help me a lot to think about whether I like teaching and to try out a lot of things, and also to develop my own portfolio so I can show that I can actually in a structured way talk about important things, and it can be helpful to others. I find it very rewarding that so many people like my vlog, and I get so much positive feedback. But yeah, as much as I love this, I'm not only doing this because I'm completely, I forgot the word. So yeah, I'm not only a nice person, I also think this is potentially going to be good for me, and I can learn a lot from this myself. So yeah. So you can use these things to develop skills or to practice things and communicate them. One great example, I think, is Angie's Brain blog, where he used the years of his PhD, and while he was learning how to do fMRI data analysis, every time he learned something new, he made a brief video about it and explained it to other people, so that they don't have to learn it from scratch and like go through all the hassles of trying it out. So I think this is also great to deepen your knowledge. It certainly will increase your visibility, which is a good thing and helps in networking. And to me, at least, this feels meaningful, and I have a lot of fun doing this. So even if only 5 people find it helpful and now only 2 people are watching live, I'm happy to talk to the 2 of you. And I know that a lot of people will watch this video later and might get some helpful information out of this. So the downside of this is that online tutorials and lectures, especially in the beginning when you just start with a series, for example, will take a lot of time in preparation and advertising. This is something you have to plan on. So same as for blogging, it feels like a commitment because you're trying to do this on a regular basis. And your advisors might not like this. So this is definitely something which is so visible that you can't hide it. So unless you're doing this anonymously, this is certainly something you should talk about with your PI. I also have a few friends who, during their PhD, were really busy in research tool development and method development, and also working on developing new software and hardware. I think this is great if you know what you're doing, and this is great to increase your visibility and application of your skills. And especially if you are planning to maybe not stay in academia, but do a more engineering type of job. So yeah, I think this is great for people who love problem solving and are already good at programming. This is something which is very difficult to do if you do not already have a relatively large skill set of basic skills for doing this. And it's really worth investing if you consider going on a more engineering or like tool development job after your PhD. So yeah, I think this is probably the most useful thing you can do. And you can, for example, also communicate the tool you're developing on your blog and make it very visible and searchable on the internet. So I think this is very useful. So I'm at the end of what I had summed up to write, to talk about today. So you now have a few more minutes to ask questions. And otherwise, please continue voting for topics for the academic crisis line. The topic for the next session is already quite clear. We're going to talk about how to manage your supervisor and how to deal with issues and things when with your supervisor, and how to develop having a good professional relationship with them. On December 19th, which is the last academic crisis line session for this year, we're going to talk about dealing with rejection and frustration. And I'm going to have two very exciting guests, and I'm very looking forward to this. And the two ladies who are going to join me for this session had their fair share of obstacles and stones in their way, and they have a very interesting story to tell, so I'm very much looking forward to this. And I had to agree on the timing of the session and the topic beforehand, because we had to find a date where everybody was able to make it. For the next year, I'm probably going to change the time of the live session for the simple reason that I have the feeling it doesn't really, the time which I picked does not really work that well for many, because I see how many people are watching the video later on, but that during the live session, actually a few people join. And I would really, really, really like to have this more interactive and have more questions. So talking about questions, there's one coming here. How can I back out of a side project if it turns out to be too demanding? Well, given that it's a side project, I think there should always be an opportunity to back out, and you should be able to do this without feeling too guilty. So committing to a project, you should already be relatively clear, especially when there are other people involved, what your role in the project is, and how much work and effort and time you have to put into this, and most importantly also when. In case this changes and somebody else drops out of the project and you have to take over their work or something, you should negotiate with the other people who are involved in the project to see whether you can shift the workload and make it doable for everybody else. If the project is just not doable as a side project because it's actually too demanding and too heavy load, this is also something you should talk about with the people who are involved. If you're the only person being involved, then you just put it aside. And I think if a project has been aside for a really long time and you're just not going to do it, then just file draw it for a year, and then just check after a year whether you still find it interesting. Then you can see whether you can make time for it or not. And if not, also don't be afraid to just give up on a project. It's totally okay. Not every project is made for success, and not every project is doable. So even if it was a great idea, if you don't have the time to do it and you have 100 other great ideas, then it's just the way it is. And yeah, but I think it's really important when more people are involved that you don't shy away from actually talking about the project and how you anticipate that you're not going to be able to play your role with the current workload. And then either you find a solution together or you can't. So, or maybe you can just find another person who's willing to collaborate and work on the project with you and take over part of your share. So, yeah. I think it's not something you should be too afraid of, because everybody in a side project is totally aware that this is a side project and that this can happen because it's not your main priority. Okay, so if there are not more questions now, then please stay tuned for the next 2 sessions of Academic Crisis Line for this year, which will be in 2 weeks and on December 19th. We're going to talk about how to manage a supervisor and how to deal with rejection and frustration. And in the new year, I'm going to make a survey to find a new time where more people can join the live stream and ask questions. And I hope we find a better solution for everybody. So until then, enjoy the Thanksgiving holidays or the rest of the week, and have a good time. See you soon.